Marco Codes! Hi, Marco here. Let's continue building our Java-based text editor. Yay! Alright, what did we do in the last episode? We implemented vertical scrolling, meaning you can use your arrow keys up and down to scroll, well, up and down. What you cannot do is, well, you physically can, but whenever you press the page down or page up button, nothing is happening here on the screen, so we need to implement that. Then also things like, for example, when I press the end key, my cursor is jumping to the end of the screen instead of to the end of the line. Or when I'm at the beginning of the line and I press the arrow left key, I would love to go to the end of the previous line, but nothing's happening here, so we need to fix that. All these tiny editor things. There's another big elephant in the room, and that is what I've shown you so far only works on Linux. There are a couple of bugs on macOS, we need to fix them, and also the whole Windows support is lacking. So in this episode, we have to make our text editor platform independent. A whole lot of work, let's get going. Let's warm up by implementing page up and page down. So what we already did in the last episode is detect those key presses. So we can simply go to our handle key method and say, well, if someone presses page up or presses page down, then similarly to, pressing arrow up, down, arrow left, right, we want to move our cursor. Right, let's go to move cursor, add a new case down here and say, well, if someone presses page up, page down, we need to do something. What do we need to do? Well, we're going to use a tiny trick. For a second, imagine if someone pressed page up, we want to handle it as if the user pressed the arrow up key, meaning we want to move the cursor up by one line. Same with page down, we just want to move the cursor down by one line. The way we can do this is by just calling move cursor again, saying, well, if the user pressed page up, then we want to move the cursor as if the user pressed the arrow up key. Other than that, the arrow down key, and a tiny quick fix here. Now our cursor moves up by one line or down by one line. We just don't want to move it by one line. Ideally, for a start, we want to move it by, let's say, the amount of rows my screen has. So what I could do is a nice little for loop. Say, well, I equals 0 less than rows my screen has. Let's move the cursor around. Let's try that out. Back on the command line, let's open up our big TXT file. My cursor is at the top of the screen. Let me push page down. Well, it kind of worked. It seemed like, moving by one line or so. Let me try again. Yeah, now it looks like, I'm really, paging. There's some flickering, which you just saw. We need to fix that also and find out why that is. But for now, let's think about why the first page down was broken. Well, my cursor is at the top of the screen. I'm telling my cursor to move down by 28 rows, right? The amount of rows my screen has, which means I'm literally just, moving down by the whole page by one line. Now that my cursor is at the bottom of the screen, now whenever I press page down, I really start paging. The fix for that, the quick fix for that is, no matter where my cursor is on the screen, when I press page down, I want to first anchor my cursor to the last row of the screen, and then, move the 28 rows or so to page. Similarly, when I press page up, I want to anchor my cursor to the top of the screen and then, move up. So let's implement that. Right, some quick and dirty coding. If my key equals page up, I want to move cursor to top of screen. Right, let me just create that skeleton method. Going back here once again, else if the key equals, I'm just going to write it out, page down, move cursor to bottom of screen, like so. Let me create the method, and then I'm just going to reorder these two methods. I'm going to swap them, so the bottom is at the bottom. How would I move the cursor to the top of the screen? Well, moving the cursor to the top means we have to modify the cursor Y coordinate. We need to reset it to offset Y. Now let's think about why that is. Again, you need to actually watch the last episode if you missed that on how we calculated offset Y. But essentially, if my screen has 100 rows, my file has 150 rows. That means my offset Y, if my cursor is at the end of the file, if the cursor Y is at the end of the file, is 50. We're just tracking how far did we move off the screen, which also means that offset Y always points to the first line of the screen that we want to be drawn. So resetting cursor Y, offset Y means moving the cursor up. Same for moving a cursor to the bottom of the screen, by the way. Cursor Y equals offset Y plus, so the first line of the screen, plus the amount of rows my screen has, 0 base minus 1. Last but not least, if it so happened that we're somewhere at the bottom of the file and we're just paging down, it could mean we jump over the content, which means we need to safeguard that. If cursor Y is bigger than the content size, content is the lines of the file that we have, then cursor Y should be content.size, which means put the cursor behind the last line of the file. Let's check out if that works. Reopening our file again, right? I'm just going to put my cursor here in the middle of the file, pressing page down. Yes, and that seemed to work. Do some simple arithmetic now. Do the math. You can see my coordinates here at the bottom. Y equals now 55, rows 28. Let me know if that is correct, right? But I can actually, page up, page down. I'm pretty much happy. Just do some double checking. Other than that, paging up and down already works. All right, let's do something hardcore and implement horizontal scrolling. Let me show you something. Back in our big TXT file, if I scroll down a tiny bit, you can see, well, I just got some heavy flickering here. Why is that? Well, if I move up a bit and have a look at that paragraph here, to Sherlock Holmes, she's always the okay woman. I've seldom heard him mention her. Okay, whatever. The fact is, in my text file, the whole block of text is actually just one line, right? And my terminal window is kind of smart, so it does some soft wrapping, meaning that in his eye, this should be the end of the line, but then I get the eyes, she eclipses, blah, 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 and question the memory till the end. I get that all displayed here. Ideally, what I want to do is what I want my program to do. I only want to display this part of the line. The rest here should be hidden, and only when my cursor is here at the very right of the screen and I press the right key, then I should horizontally scroll the whole file. Let's implement that. Okay, back in our IDE, just a quick reminder again that you should watch the previous episode to find out how offset Y and cursor Y play together and how all of that was calculated. Because what we're going to do now is what every good developer does is simply copy and paste some existing code that you don't understand, that you don't fully understand, and just modify it until it works. Let me show you how. Well, we have cursor Y, we have offset Y, so we could assume that, well, to do the horizontal scrolling, we also need offset X, and we're going to set it to 0. Then what we're going to do is we're going to highlight offset Y and we're going to search for it. The first place we find it, we can see the scroll method, and inside the scroll method, we calculated offset Y. Well, I don't know what that method does. And in fact, I told you in the last episode, it's going to take you 20 minutes or so of thinking it through to understand how it works. So the quick fix is we're just going to copy and paste the code, make a selection and say, well, cursor Y in this piece of code should be cursor X, right? We're just going to replace all the occurrences. Same for rows. Rows should be columns. And while we're at it, offset Y should be offset X. Right, now calculating the offset X coordinate is implemented. Hopefully, let's see if that works. Again, you should think that through why that is the case. Okay, let's continue. Offset Y, where else was it used? Well, when drawing our cursor, right? Because now my cursor Y could be anywhere in the file, line 1000, whatever. The offset Y could be 100, so we need to subtract that from the Y position. And we can clone that, the exactly same behavior, and say, well, offset X should also be subtracted from the cursor X when drawing the cursor at the right point of the screen. So this should actually work. Then let's see, where else was offset Y used? Right, in the draw content method. And that is actually the biggie. Let's think through it. So inside here, inside that else method, we're in the case where we draw the current line. Let me just extract the variable, right, like so. We never want to draw the whole line, because my screen, for example, might have just 100 columns. The line might have 1,000 characters or whatever. I just then want to draw 100 characters, not the whole 1,000. We need to do a couple of things. How could we decide how much to draw? Well, we're going to have an int and say line to length to draw. like so. We're going to start with the line length, the whole line, and we could start by subtracting the offset X. If I already moved off the screen by, let's say, 50 characters, so my offset X increased, then I'm gonna draw 50 characters less from the whole line. If by chance, by the way, this now means that my length to draw is less than 0, I'm just gonna reset it to 0, right? Just a tiny safeguard. Then length to draw could still be 500 characters, much bigger than the columns my screen has. So the second check is if length to draw is greater than the amount of columns I have on the screen, then length to draw equals the columns. So by now I pretty much safeguarded the whole line against, not drawing too little negatively or drawing too much. So last but not least, if we want to draw something, if length to draw equals greater than 0, like in this case above, we don't want to draw anything, then we're just going to go, instead of builder append the whole line, we're just going to go builder append from the current line. We're going to start at offset X and then offset X plus length to draw. Right. Did that now confuse you? Those 10 lines of code? Well, again, think through those lines of code, why they might be working, why they might not be working. We're going to check out on the command line right now if this stuff actually does something. Right, reopening big file txt. Let's see what happens. I'm going to scroll down here a tiny bit. Yes, that already looks promising. As you can see now, to Sherlock Holmes, she's always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention. Let me scroll to the right. Let's see if horizontal scrolling. No, look at that. Nothing works here to the right. Why is that? Well, let's go back and find out. I think it could have something to do with our move cursor method. Let's see what move cursor does. If I press arrow right, I can see right, it's safeguarded. Cursor X always has to be less than the amount of columns my screen has, which doesn't make sense. What we need to do here is we need to get the current line. We'll get the current line by, from all the lines we have, get the line at position cursor Y, and then the length of the line -1. That should actually work. Back in the terminal window, let me find Sherlock Holmes' crazy woman again. So we're going to scroll to the right. Let's see what is happening now. Ooh, how cool is that? The whole screen scrolls to the right. Maybe I can also scroll to the left. Let's check it out. Yes, that also works. Isn't that cool? Horizontal scrolling is implemented. Bam. Okay, let's make our end key work properly. Because at the moment, when I'm on a random line, I press the end key, I'm moving to the end of the screen, not to the end of the line. That is not cool. Let's go back to the IDE. All right, somewhere inside our move cursor method, we should have the end case, right? That's correct. Cursor X should be columns -1, which is not what we want to have. That's my screen columns. Instead, I want to get the current line, content get cursor Y, which gives me the current line, and I can simply get the line's length, which will anchor my cursor after the last character of the line, by the way. Up here, I just forgot just a couple of minutes earlier to delete the -1 here with the arrow right, so we couldn't actually move the cursor after the last character of the line, which we now can do. Let's see if this works. Opening up our file again, I'm just going to move here, end key. Yes, look at that. That kind of worked. Well, we can still, unfortunately, move down here and it doesn't, snap the cursor to the end of the line. But other than that, whenever I press end, even here, it just moves me in the correct position. That means we only need to implement the snapping. Okay, back in our move cursor method, the mighty move cursor method. We have our switch statement, which effectively moves the cursor around. What we could do is we could say that after the switch statement, if my cursor is in the wrong position, then simply reposition it. In the case of snapping, what I want to do is if the cursor X is greater than my current line's length, right? I just want to get the current line here, which I'm on now. And then I'm going to set the cursor X to exactly current line dot length, like so. Now, what is that current line method? Well, let's extract it because I just need to get from my content list, from all the lines I have, get the cursor Y position. So Current line, I'm just going to extract a method here, keep the original signature, replace all occurrences, because I have that code already in a couple of places down here. So if cursor x greater than current line length, then set cursor x to the line's length. Problem is, I can put cursor y actually one line below the last line of my file because I want to be able to add new text, new content. So in fact, this here, we need to safeguard it. We have to say that, well, only if cursor y is less than content size, right? Then I should return content get cursor y. Other than that, please return null for me, which gives me a problem because now what suddenly can happen is that current line is, you can see that IntelliJ highlights it. It says it may produce a null pointer exception. Now, what do we have to do here? Well, let's just extract a line up here, like so. Line, and only if the line is not 0 and the cursor x is greater than my line's length, then I want to reposition cursor x. Up here, I can also see that my line here can lead to null pointer exceptions. Replace this occurrence. Let me just double check where we have that. Right. Again, I'm going to make a quick fix. If line is not 0, right, I'm going to safeguard here. New line is, that didn't work properly. So let me just replace that. We have to get the current line down here again because we moved our we moved the cursor, right? And it doesn't point to the old line anymore. And over here, again, we're going to make that simpler with a nice little refactoring in the next episode. Again, I'm going to go if line is not 0, and then I can actually remove this check up here, like so. Only then should cursor x be line.length. A lot of refactoring. Let's see if this code actually works. Opening up our file again. Let me move down a couple of lines, end key down. Yes, it snaps to the end of the new line. How cool is that? Almost feels like a real text editor. All right, folks, so here's the thing. Up next, what I wanted to do is when I'm at the beginning of a line, I press the left arrow key that I snap to the end of the previous line. Same thing here, when I hit the right key at the end of a line, then I want to move down to the next line, to the beginning of the next line. But I feel so exhausted from recording the previous sections that I want to move straight into the platform independence and give you this as an exercise. If you have questions of how the arrow left, arrow right wrapping works, then I might include it in the next episode. But so far, please give it a try. And with my platform independent code, you can actually just clone my repository later on and give it a go on any operating system, Mac, Linux, Windows. It will just work. So let's do the platform independence now. All right, let's make our editor work on macOS. What's the problem? 2 episodes ago, we started making native calls into the operating system to get the current window size and also to set our terminal into RAW mode. Interestingly enough, the API is the same between Linux and macOS. Problem is, however, that, for example, on Linux, you call ioctl with this specific value here to get you the correct window size, with the tiocgwin size value. Stupidly enough, that value is different on macOS, and you have to specify the correct value. Even more so, when, for example, you get the term iOS struct from the operating system to set those flags to put the terminal into RAW mode, the fields have different data types on macOS than they have on Linux. So long instead of ints. And these tiny changes, ints, longs, and different values make your editor break on macOS. Very stupid, but we have to fix that. All right, so if I remember correctly, there was a method called enable raw mode, right? And get window size. And by the way, there should also be, when I go to exit, right, I have yet to extract that method. There should be a method called disable raw mode again to reset our terminal. Now, the thing is, what do we do with these 3 methods? Let me scroll down a tiny bit. Enable raw mode, disable raw mode, get window size. Let's create a new class and call it Unix terminal. And then we're going to move the 3 methods up here, the private static methods, enable raw mode, disable raw mode, and get window size into that new class. Original attributes, let me just see where we got them right. We saved them up here somewhere inside our editor. We don't need that anymore. Now we just want to go back to the enable raw mode location and save the attributes here. Now the method shouldn't be private static void anymore. So what we're going to do is instead of private static, we're just going to make the methods public like so, right? And we have our Unix terminal. A couple more tiny problems. Get window size now returns my libc window size. And in fact, what we need to do is because we want to have it run on macOS, we want to have it run on Windows, there's going to be different structs we're going to be using. So I'm just going to go window size and we make an int rows and an int columns, right? Or it could also be width and height. Maybe I'm going to change that later on, but for now, this is good. Then we're going to say, well, this here returns window size, like so. And the way it's going to do that is new window size and win size row, win size columns. Right. So we have that. Last but not least, we could extract an interface, meaning we're going to say, well, the interface name is going to be terminal. All three methods should pop up in the interface, right? Click through the dialog windows. Oh, well, IntelliJ created a new class. Actually, let me just delete that. It's a bit tricky now because I'm putting everything into one file to make the build process easier. And later on, we'll think about how to structure our project a bit better. So for now, I'm just going to have the terminal here, right? And my Unix terminal implements terminal and has these three methods. By the way, one very last thing I could do is I could move my libc library into this Unix terminal class. And actually I need to because, as I said before, for macOS, this is going to be different. Now it's all nicely encapsulated into this one class, Unix terminal, and I could just move it outside. Now it will get even dirtier because what we're going to do is some good old code duplication, meaning I don't want to think about the best way of what the next abstraction level is at the moment for this. We're just going to clone the entire class, Unix terminal. We're going to call it macOS terminal, get the uppercasing right, have a look down here, and the only two things that need changing is I need to put in the correct value here for the TIOCGWinSZ, right? It's here. Also, I need to make sure that my termios struct is full of long fields, and that's everything I need to do to make this thing macOS compatible. Yes, there's a fair amount of duplication. Please let me know in the comments how you would solve it. And I'm going to show you my solution in one of the next videos. Now it's time to finally create a new terminal. What we can do is up here somewhere, let's instantiate a new terminal. Terminal equals, right? I'm going to call a JName method is Mac, right? Then we're going to create a new macOS terminal. And other than that, we're just going to create a new Unix terminal, right? And maybe a new Unix terminal, not just a Unix terminal. And then down here, we're just going to go terminal enable raw mode. By the way, I'm just going to put that into the init editor method to clean up a tiny bit. So we've got that enable raw mode. We're going to go call terminal get window size. And this here returns us a window size, not the libc specific class. Then we have columns, we have rows, and then let's see what else we have. When we scroll down here through the file, there should be a terminal disable raw mode. Right, that's it. Let's check out if our code still works on Linux. Here we go. Text editor is loading, and yes, we can see, right, paging up and down, scrolling, jumping to the end still works. Now try this out on macOS. I don't have my virtual machine now set up properly, but it is supposed to work because I double checked it before recording the episode. Now let's take care of Windows. Last but not least, Windows support. What's the challenge? Well, Windows uses a completely different API than Linux or macOS does. For example, to get the window size or to set the terminal into raw mode. And if you're not used to native Windows calls, what you might want to do is you search for something like Windows terminal raw mode, because that's the first thing we need to do. You get a nice little documentation page, high-level console modes, where you can see, right, The Windows terminal seems to be able to be set into cook mode, raw mode, and whatever. There's a couple of methods mentioned here, get console mode, set console mode, and a couple of constants, including the values, how you can call these functions. And this is actually the right place, and you'd have to spend a considerable amount of time to now understand, hey, how would I call get console mode, for example? Open it up, see the definition here of the console mode function. Again, the values you can put into it. And then when you scroll down, you can see that it comes from the kernel 32 library. So you would have to go through all these documentation pages and write similar JNA code to what we did for Linux. The shortcut is we just go back to the IDE now, and I'll paste in the fully working code. Now let me scroll up a bit because it's a fair amount of code. So first of all, what I did is write some JNA code wrapping the kernel 32 library calls. Similarly to, instead of loading the native C library, I'm just loading the native kernel 32 library. And then I have a couple of calls, get console mode, set console mode, get console screen buffer info, that I have to call to set the raw mode, disable raw mode, and also to get the window size. When I scroll up a tiny bit more, I can see that's exactly the three functions my new Windows terminal class has. So my Windows terminal has enable raw mode, calls a couple of Windows or kernel 32 specific functions, disable raw mode, same thing, get window size. Don't worry about it, just check out my code. You don't have to spend hours and hours coming up with this code. It should be working. Now, before I show you that this actually works in the command line window, let me scroll up a tiny bit, because up here where we instantiate our terminal, I will say platform is Windows. If the platform is Windows, then instantiate a new Windows terminal. Otherwise, if the platform is Mac, new Mac OS terminal. Otherwise, just default to a Unix terminal. Let's check out if this works. Right, so in the background, we have my Ubuntu terminal. In the foreground, we have my Windows cmd.exe terminal. Let's run our program. Let's see what happens. Well, that looks quite cool. So I can scroll down, I can scroll up, I can move my cursor to the end of the line. Let me just see if I can actually scroll to the right also. I mean, yes, I will be able to scroll to the right. So let's see if that works. Yes, this here also works. How cool is that? So effectively, what we now have working is Windows support, macOS support, Unix support. Cool. All right, folks, that's it for this episode. Let me know what you want to see next. Do you want to see more cursor movements? Do you want to see stuff like tab rendering, for example, which isn't working yet? Do you want to see basic syntax highlighting or text editing, whatever it is? Let me know in the comments, or I won't make any other videos. Thanks for watching. Sayonara.